I'd like to welcome everyone to the Stockbridge Library online poetry series. We are in season 3 now. John, I think you said creeping up on our 100th session.
Yeah.
Which is amazing.
100.
This series was started back in 2020 when we were all on lockdown and really needed the respite of gathering together over poetry. And we are out and about, but I think that sense hasn't changed for many of us. We are in season 3 now, and the theme is inquiry and asking questions and the power of poetry in both the asking and the answering of questions. And we are very lucky to have with us today Lisken van Pelt, and she will be in conversation with John Gillespie, who is a former president of the board of the Stockbridge Library Association. And again, as I mentioned, the real founding genius of this program. A few words about our poet, and then I will turn the program over to John and to Lisken. Lisken is, of course, a poet. She's also a teacher and martial artist. She was raised in England, the US, and Mexico, and is now living in Massachusetts. Her work can be found in several journals, including Conduit, the South Carolina Review, Upstreet, and she's also earned honors from the Comstock Review, the Atlanta Review, and Cider Press Review. She has a chapbook, Everywhere at Once, that came out in 2009, and her first full-length book, What We're Made Of, is due out, hold on now, it says in May of 2016, so I think we may have had an older bio. That's probably been published at this point. So, Lisken, thank you for joining us. John, thank you for leading our discussion of poetry today. I would like to turn the program over to the two of you.
Yeah, Wendy, thanks, and thanks for the library hosting. Yeah, this is Wendy knows this is my fun time of the week with all the other stuff that goes on in life. So Lisken, thanks for joining us today. So let's begin with the question of, what does inquiry really mean to you?
Well, first, thank you for having me again, and thank you, Wendy, for the introduction. I will say, yes, that is an older bio. That chapbook did come out, and actually another chapbook came out earlier this year, so I'll read a couple from that. So thank you, John, and thank you for the question. I think it's a really rich topic for this year's series, and it's been interesting to think about a little bit. And as usual, I often move to etymology when I'm thinking about an idea and a notion. And so inquiry actually comes from the same, I found it very interesting, I didn't realize this, but the word inquiry comes from the same root as the same Proto-Indo-European root as our interrogative and relative pronouns do. So if you think of the French or Latin or Spanish versions that have the k sound, right? So que, quien, por qué, cuando, con, qui, those who, what, where, why questions. So the whole idea of inquiry stems linguistically from the idea of questioning what's around us, who's around us, when things are happening, why things are happening, that sort of surrounding of curiosity, right? So I think, to me, inquiry comes down to the twin ideas of curiosity, being interested in what's happening around us, what has happened, what will happen, and then also trying to make sense of it and trying to name it. Right. So for me, I think comes a lot is sort of the natural world. The natural world definitely fascinates me, and I find lots to inquire about in the natural world, and then also the human world, right? And relationship and what it is to be in the world as a human. And what it means to be in relationship with other humans. So it's sort of those, sort of 3 layers, I suppose, right? The natural world, the human world, and then language itself, right? And how what it is to try to name something, the struggle to do that, the necessary imperfection of that, but the, you know, sort of always striving to do that. That, you know, you sort of inquiry as seeking to learn something, as trying to do something, an endeavor.
So, so do you think, you know, I like the curiosity part. It's so funny you mentioned that word. It was, I think, cited in a New York Times article as the #1 trait for a young person to have. I mean, I don't know, you know, I don't know how they do it. You know, they study 10,000 people, or I don't know, a word comes out. I don't know. No, it was kind of authoritative, but basically said is, if there's one thing you want your child to do as they grow up, is you want them to be curious. So no, I just found that, you know, kind of an interesting word for you to, you know, share with us. But I think maybe asking a question you can't answer. So does being curious invite more inquiry or more questions? I mean, is it laying the foundation for opening up to things arriving for you? I'm just wondering, I'm just kind of trying to play with the concept.
Well, I think absolutely it does, because, you know, one question inevitably leads to another, right? I mean, if it's a question of any range at any rate, right? Because I think, you know, I think what it ties to for me, and what poetry ties to for me in this respect, is that it's a way of being being present to experience in a really focused, well, interestingly, focused and expansive way. I'll actually talk about that a bit. But it's a way of being present. And so if you're present, then you're continually noticing something else, and you're noticing something else, and you're noticing something else, right? Because there's never any shortage of things to notice. So I think in that sense, yes, I think it must be sort of by its very nature an opening up. And I think that's what, you know, that's what inquiry is too, right? Is opening up, opening us up to what's there, and to time, and to each other, and to memory, and to possibility, and all of those things. The thing that what you just said made me think of is that, as Wendy mentioned in the intro, I'm also a martial artist, and there's an aspect of our training called Sanshin, which is the sort of core of our system. And we talk about there being 5 factors to developing our practice of that, which is it's actually a form of moving meditation. And the 4th factor is it's translated in English as acute insight or penetrating eye. And so it's when you think about what that means, it's always interesting to me, because it's, you know, the idea of insight, right? It's got that same in of inquiry. It's insight and penetrating eye. It's insight into the opponent, right? So that you're really sort of saying, but it's also insight. It's working in both directions. It's two directional. It's also the inner eye, right? Really being attentive to what's happening inside your own body and your own being, while simultaneously being aware and focused on really seeing into the opponent as well. And that outward gaze, to just complicate it further, or to excite it further, or to expand it further, can't be so focused on one point in the attacker that you can't take in what's going on around. It's got to, your peripheral vision has to be engaged as well. So it's really a multi-directional gaze at once that you're cultivating. And I feel like that's what poetry and inquiry in poetry is doing too, right? You're looking very closely at something, right? But simultaneously, I'm investigating and interrogating what that is in myself as well. And I'm also looking at the relationship of that thing to the broader world. So I think it's, you know, it's all of those at once.
So this is more about the technical part of your writing. So does this acute insight, I guess I call it, you know, is it an arrow you take out of your quiver and use? Or is it just part of the experience of you writing? I mean, do you have to activate it, or is it, I don't know if I'm asking the right question. Does it automatically just incorporate in what you do, or do you have to really access it?
Well, I mean, you have to show up, right?
Yeah.
And I think, but I think it's what the writing is being, is that, you know, in order to create a poem, I have to be present.
Yeah.
And that's really and so I have to look. Actually, there was a quote, and I tried when I was thinking about this reading, I tried to find it and I couldn't find it. I don't know if anybody in the audience might know. It might be Joan Didion, but I'm not positive. Said something about poetry or writing being the art of looking at, not looking away from.
Mm.
So I mean, that's, you know, that's what has to happen, right? You have to show up and actually look at, right? And then, because nothing's going to emerge if you don't do that. So I guess I think of it more as a prerequisite than as a tool, or a, you know,
Yeah.
or
It's a prerequisite. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in your poems, you know, listen, there's so many aspects of poetry. I think, you know, some people, you know, the poem is just kind of arrived. Obviously, people are thinking about stuff, and then all of a sudden there's, you know, it's like the words flow into your fingers and onto the page. You know, but for other people, it, you know, sometimes more intentional, more purposeful. You know, as far as questions in poetry, are you working questions into your poetry, or are you just letting, you know, the poem like take a life of its own?
Well, obviously there's work and craft involved, but I guess
Yeah.
in terms of the sort of questions, it's more the latter, that
Yeah.
they show up. And you know, often I'll start writing a poem and not really have any idea what it is that I'm writing, quote, about. And as I write, the subject and their, you know, the questions, the underlying questions arrive. And you know, sometimes you get lucky and that happens right up front, and
Yeah.
something comes out relatively intact. And then other times it, you know, you write stanzas and stanzas, and before any interesting really question really comes up, and then you're off and running, and you can scrap the whole first page of what you wrote and you know, move on from there. So I think you know, I write my way to the question more
Yeah.
often than not.
Yeah. No, fantastic. So can you share a few poems with us?
Sure. I thought I might actually start. So I mentioned at the beginning, sort of having the three general realms of where I find inquiry, being the natural world, the human world, and language. So I thought I might sort of start with three with three or four that kind of do that. I thought I would begin with a couple from my full-length book, What We're Made Of, which was the 2016 book. And I chose two that I don't, in fact, for all of this, I chose poems that I don't believe I've ever read before in readings. So just for fun to read some things that are a little different. And I think I saw Casey on the call here. Yes, hi Casey. So Casey, this is one that you mentioned actually in the blurb that I have never read aloud before. So might be kind of fun. So it's and this is certainly an example of inquiry from the natural world. And this particular poem doesn't have any actual questions, as in question marks, syntactical questions, but it's definitely inquiring through language and the natural world. I guess it's the two. So it's called Air, and Casey refers to it as an ode, which I think is appropriate. And it's examining the notion of air, and then also the ways in which we use the word air. So as I read through it, you can be thinking, you know, how is that air, and different phrases or expressions may come to mind that you will be able to recognize as the inspiration for each element, as it were. So air. What we can't see, can't smell, can't taste, can't hold, can't do without. The rest of it, what we throw away, superfluous gases, dust, pollen, exhaust. What we see when we look up, what we imagine awaits us, where we locate most of our gods. A great unfillable void, as in all that has disappeared into thin air. Breeze, with the brazen smell of plant sex, their flower commerce, or of salt drying, or hot dogs and pretzels. What lets my molecules become your molecules, what they travel through. What we give to our grievances. Where we go to share news or express opinions, the time to do so. What we put on when we feel least at ease, some of us. False pride, or any impression we render as aura, confidence, diffidence, regret. How we carry our particular burdens. A melody, something that floats to us from across a meadow, something that plays in our ear and remains. Relief, coolness in summer as in air conditioning, space to think as in give me some air. What we breathe, the breath itself, what we share, everything between.
Very nice.
Thank you. And then this one also from that book. This moves in a little bit of a different direction, still natural world, but where air is sort of moving up and out. This one's moving down into the earth. So this one, the origin of this poem, I was thinking about literally the ground I was standing on, and thinking what would I find if I go into that layer by layer. So this is it's called 5 Strata of Here, and it's in 5 short sections, moving down into the earth. 1. Green wheeze of crickets aspiring to ignition, and wind combing pollen into the air. Hedge roses smoldering, and petals scattered like bones picked clean. 2. Bottles, nails, a heavy flat iron, segments of old railroad ties, strap sandals, and earthworms making the best of it. 3. Rutted road, half moons from horseshoes, the snap of a crop. A lady is waiting up at the house where tea will be served while evening settles into a murmur. Here, a knuckle bled into the ground when it scraped against a stirrup. 4. Very thin, very dense, a hard winter or two. Dark with all the windows sealed. One suspects the memory of daffodils in springtime, but the evidence is sparse. 5. Fires here, and an old forest. Flicker of bone, whittled sharp, the shape of survival. A cricket's wing in maple sap.
Right.
So I think for that it also brings in another piece of the inquiry idea for me, which is that poetry for me is also a means of remembering. It's an articulation of memory, whether it's one's own memory specifically, or whether it's a more, as in that poem, a more generalized human memory, which of course memory and imagination are inextricably intertwined. So that poem certainly is memories as imagination, or imagining what might have existed in those times, in those layers of earth. So I think poetry also brings in that element. So I'll read one from my newest chapbook here, Letters to My Dead. And this
I love
one,
I love the title.
Thank you, thank you. Well, it's a collection, it's a chapbook, it's 16 poems, and they are all letter poems, poem letters addressed to various of my beloved deceased, and foremost among them my mother, who passed a few years ago. And so they are rather explicitly asking questions, many of them of the dead, and either generalized ones about the experience of death or more specific sort of personal ones. So this one that I'm going to read you here is I seem to have the wrong page number here. Sorry, bear with me just a moment here. Okay. This one here has to do with a different kind of questioning. I guess it's the questioning of the deceased after their death. Maybe questions that one might have wished one asked before they passed. Maybe ones that you actually would never actually ask of the person alive. So that idea of having this dialogue with somebody who's not present. This one I have not read aloud, partly because it has French in it, and so that's always a little bit tricky, but I'm going to go for it anyway. Some of you may be familiar with there's a wonderful collection of a book called Moder Gus Ram, which, if you understand that in French, I mean, it makes sense. It's the words of the hours, but it's actually nonsensical French throughout the book, but they are Mother Goose rhymes rendered just in terms of their sound into French. So this one is called Humpty Dumpty, and it's there has some excerpts from the rendering of Humpty Dumpty into French, and I'll just give you the line Humpty Dumpty in translation. So it's un petit d'un petit, which you can hear is like saying Humpty Dumpty with a French accent, but un petit d'un petit literally means a small one, or a small, like a child, a small something from a small something. So un petit d'un petit to me refers, in this context of this poem, brings to mind the idea of a child being born from a mother who was at one time also a child, and the ways in which we all are children forever, really, even into death. So empathy. So Humpty Dumpty. Your old friend Dominique wrote to me today, 2 days before your birthday. Were you in love with her husband? A little. We never quite had that conversation. The men we loved publicly, the men we loved privately, the women who loved those men. Is love any easier now, free of body? It was Dominique who gave us a copy of Moder Gus Ram, wasn't it? Un petit d'un petit. As long as I am in body, I will be of yours. Dominique sent pictures of her newest granddaughter watching Kamala speak on TV. Un petit d'un petit, c'est ton osal. She couldn't visit them in Paris because of lockdown. Un petit d'un petit, ah, de près de pâle. What else was lacking? What do you lack now? Sometimes you would marvel at the similarities between your life and mine, our contradictions. For both of us, definition, a kind of oscillation. We average to some long-drowned city in the Atlantic, to acceptable women, to people of passable faith and faithlessness. We bleed sweet and sour like citrus and complication straddle walls uneasily. Womanhood, another misdirection. I turn your memory over in my hands like a secret, stroke it smooth. Happy birthday.
Good. Very nice. Now let's take we usually have a little break, something we did start to do this year. No, those poems are fantastic. Yeah, I should tell you that there was a picture in the New York Post of Humpty Trump Dumpty on the wall after the Republicans lost a lot of the election. Yeah, it was the New York Post back page, front page. Yeah, Humpty Dumpty. Yeah, tough to put them back together again.
Yes.
So I want to encourage the audience. Kathy, you've been around quite a bit. We want to let the audience provide a comment, ask a question of the poet. I think Kathy knows, I always say, don't let the poet off easy. So if anyone wants to unmute, ask a question, just go right ahead. Anybody? Peter, don't let her off the hook. Come on. It's payback time. No, only kidding. I'm encouraging Lisken. I don't know if this is a good thing.
Teresa's waving.
Yeah. Oh, Teresa. Go ahead.
Need to unmute.
Yeah. Teresa, you're muted. You can't. Okay. Oh, there you go, Teresa. Okay, good.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry about that. Sorry about that. I have a couple comments to this wonderful poet, and I'm finding in poetry something that is dear to me is the idea that a line, expression, a stanza, or part of a poem, even simply a title, I can live with it in my head for all day, for a day or a week. I can't always pull up and have certain things memorized unless I put some effort into that. But your poem, the poet featured today, her wonderful poem "Air" was striking to me about the in-between. And then I just wanted to mention a couple lines I think that are going to stay with me a long time. One of them was, petals like bones picked clean. I thought that was so much imagery in that, both in the natural world and in a cerebral sort of way. Also, interesting to the investigation of inquiry, evidence is sparse. And I thought that the word evidence in relationship to our theme was striking, terrific to me. And another one, I don't know if I'm saying this correct, the ending, a cricket's wing on maple sap?
In maple sap.
In maple sap. That just blew me away, thinking a cricket's wing in maple sap. I never ever would have, we see things in the natural world, but incorporating them in the mold of a poem, to have both the observation of the natural world, but have it be coupled and combined with the cerebral, emotional, and poetic form. I'm very inspired by your work.
Well, I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad. Thank you for those appreciations.
I have to ask about one more line. I have to double check sometimes. I'm deaf in my right ear, so I'm always checking. Was the line like citrus and complication?
Yes,
Oh, okay. Wow.
yes, we bleed sweet and sour like citrus and complication.
Oh,
You heard correctly.
it's
Yeah,
just
great.
brilliant. Thank you.
Anybody else? Casey, Kathy, Susan?
I'd like to know if your book, Letters to My Dead, if that, you said that your mother was a frequent recipient of the letters. Is it a number of other people as well? And I'm kind of curious about if the poems just started coming out and then the idea of putting them all together in this collection came after that, or if you set out to do that.
Sure. So as far as the addressees, some of them are quite specifically and explicitly my mother. Some of them are a blend of her and other people. Some of them are other people. So and it's not, I don't think to the casual reader who doesn't know the intimacies of my life, it's not necessarily clear who the addressees might be or whether the addressee in one poem is the same as the other, though a few that are specifically to my mother, there's recurring motifs that would indicate that they are the same addressee, but it's a range. As far as the genesis of the book, actually the original genesis came after I heard a reading between Natalie Diaz and Ada Limon, who had a correspondence, a poetry correspondence during COVID. They had sent poems back and forth to each other that were in essence letters to each other that then they would respond to it in a poem. And they shared some of these in a reading, and I was very taken by them and inspired by them. And so that was sort of the original genesis, and then I started to write these poems, and then gradually they evolved into this collection.
Oh, wonderful. Thank
It's
you.
and it was a very much a COVID production, the collection.
And you don't have any, under the title, you're not saying for my mother, and you're not
No.
specifying, and
No.
that was purposeful.
Yes.
Very nice.
In earlier drafts, they all began dear, and then a letter, dear X, or dear, and then had a love me at the end, but those got cut in the revision process.
One of the reasons I asked that question is just when I just submitted a first collection for a chapbook, there was a lot of confusion about pronouns, and so it made me wonder if anybody questioned that for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in this case, that they're all really the primary pronoun of the collection is you, and that I think it's less problematic than when you're dealing with he's and she's, because the you in these is fairly explicitly the dead addressee, but then also in many cases, I hope, the reader, so that one can, but that's not really a confusion so much as
Sure.
as an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the questions.
Two-way.
Anybody
Mm.
else? Oh, Casey, go ahead.
I have a question for Lisken. Thanks for putting this thing on. It's really been really helpful in thinking about inspiration and inquiry. And I wanted to ask, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, since you're a musician and a martial artist, and I was wondering how you feel like, how do you get music, or how do you find music in your inquiry, or to what degree does music influence your poetry, or martial artists influence your poetry, and how do you incorporate that into a draft or into a poem that you're writing? If that's a question you can address.
Well, it's a good one.
I'm interested in music and poetry, and because the other person said she once walks around with a line poetry in her head, but I also walk around with the Nutcracker in my head, or something in my head, right? A song in your head, right? So, how does, I don't know. I'm just trying to think about how rhythm and sound works in poetry through the inquiry process.
Right. Well, I think so. John, here's a question that's not let me off easily, right? So I think for me, I'm answering off the cuff because this is not something I've thought about in these terms before in terms of how it connects to inquiry. But I think it comes back to the language part of my original answer to the question about where I find inquiry, right? Because, and also maybe it comes back to John's question about whether I write my way to the questions or whether that's a purposeful inclusion. And because I think that the language leads me to the questions. And part of one aspect of language that's leading me to the questions is the rhythm, is the momentum that language generates in its when words get added together into syntax, and when lines get built, and when line breaks announce themselves, and pauses and breath get some galloping going of some sort. So I think that's probably the way in which I think music or some aspects of music inform the inquiry part of the process. So that if I really do, once I, like I said to John, you have to show up, and then it can be agonizing for long stretches, but then there are those at least short stretches where the language starts to move me, right, and starts to move and lead my thought and lead my ideas. And that's the melody, it's the rhythm, it's the momentum, it's the breath, and so you sort of folded martial arts into the question a little bit too. And so that's in the body. How am I feeling it in the body? So I suppose that's all connected as well to the question of the music.
Yeah, and I don't think it's really articulatable completely, the process of making a poem. It can, or even reducible to purely the idea of asking a question or inquiry, because there's a whole another part of it that is, you don't want to turn it into a mystery, because there is the craft of poetry, but there's a way in which it isn't. You're right. It comes to you, and you don't come to it. Right. That's stupid, but you know what I mean? So, right. Yeah.
Great.
I used to tell when I was teaching high school, I used to define good writing to my students as part art, part science, and part magic.
That's
Yeah,
nice.
Great. So Lisken, do you have some more poems you'd like to share with us?
Sure, I do. Always.
Always?
So yes, absolutely. I love to share my work with people. So I think, let's see here. Narrow it down a little. Maybe I'll read this one next. This is a poem that I chose to consider for today because it is entirely in questions, and it has to do with the migrant experience, and has to do with language, and so it's an attempt to sort of inhabit the uncertainty of that, of moving between languages, moving into the unknown. I think it also seemed relevant to me because, to me, part of what poetry's power is, and certainly when we think about inquiry in poetry, is that it's a place where we permit ourselves to dwell in uncertainty and doubt, which is not something that in our quotidian days we value as much as we value other things. But I think it's an important quality because it's certainly a piece of experience. And so we need to look at it and give it value. So anyway, this poem's called Taxonomy. What do you call a lost captain? Who is the god on your tongue? What is the port that you sail towards? What is the name of your ship? What is the coin of your old realm? What kind of script are its stories? Which are the sounds they are told in? What are the words to your songs? What are the terms that you count with? What do you say when it's late? How do they say it that's different? What will you speak in your sleep? How does a toucan say toucan? How does a border decide? What is the word for your people? How can you name what you are?
And I think we just got our 1,000 questions in one poem.
There you go. Yeah, that's definitely, and about identity and all those things that we're constantly wondering about. I'll move next to one that actually has no explicit questions in it, just to give us a little bit of balance. But it is about inquiry and conversation and attempts to name. I think that's one of the other things that I think of poems asking the reader to do, is be in conversation with the poet, with themselves, with each other, with the world, with time. So this one is well, it's called Love, comma. So it's sort of the lead in to the poem. So, love, tell me about the time we fell in love and didn't know it. Arguing about argue versus discuss. Your black thunderbird purring beneath us in the parking lot of your inconsolable apartment, the one with the broken steps and the kitchen table jammed against the wall and no light anywhere. How it was almost the end, me refusing to acknowledge that I could ever need anyone, and you taking that as rejection. It's not a story like music, more like the sky had to go somewhere, and that night we went with it. When we got out of your car, there was mine, waiting for me to leave. Tell me how you watched me go to open the door and how I stopped. And we walked silently up those broken stairs, and when we reached the top, we kissed, mouths like mirrors. Tell me again how this is love, how we never fully understand anyone, but have to try, taking our chances, even in the dark, step by tongue, by word.
Well, I love the line, the sky had to go somewhere and we went with it. Wow. Talk about flying out of your apartment or whatever. Yeah. Woo. No, that was all of a sudden I was like, it's like the roof blew off the apartment house and you just
That's love for you.
that's love. Yeah, it's love. Yeah, you can't put a roof on it, can't contain it. No, it was really great. All sorts of great, just fantastic imagery.
Thank you. Thanks. So I have time for a couple more.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. So let me do this one then. This one it may not be done being edited. So this one's a raw one. I'm working on a new collection, and this will be in that collection, possibly title poem. We'll see. So this is All Our Little Gods, at least as it exists today. So all our little gods. Which god remembers the galaxy furrowed before your birth, your future, before the past that was yet to arrive? Flames seeking their own consumption. The books in the library, that story you never told, not even to yourself, in darkness. Which god holds the seeds of your disaster written on the shore? Unspooling line describing the continent, its blue edge winding into space. Oh, each heart is broken. We need a god who can fit our globe into the acorn you finger in your pocket. The books burn still, have yet to burn. Such memories cannot be withstood easily, even by gods. They are not spared any more than you, your heart, its pages burning in beautiful annihilation.
On a Zoom
What
call.
more can we ask then than to be alive in the face of memories undoing? All our little gods flinching beside us. So obviously lots of questioning in that one.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I like the, what was that? The gods writing your seeds of destruction on the beach or something? I was like,
Yeah, there's a lot of the gods hold the seeds of your disaster written on the shore.
yeah,
Sure.
wow, wow.
Um,
Yeah, sure. One more or so. And
Okay.
before we do that, though, I want to let everybody know, if you want to be on our mailing list, I put my email address in the chat box. You could email me. We just add you to the list. We do not. The list is under, secret control. It's on that shore that Lisken just talked about, under a boulder. We just email people. Yeah. No, we just email people about the events that are coming up in the next week. That's it. We're not selling you credit cards or anything else. So it's just a way to stay in the loop. Or you can go to just the Stockbridge Library and, check things out. So if you want to do that, send me an email. Okay, Lisken, go ahead.
Okay. Well, why don't I just read, I'd like to read one more of mine, and then I'd actually like to finish we'll see what we have for time. There's a poem by Ellen Bass I might share, there's a quote from Rilke that I definitely would like to share.
Rilke, yeah.
Okay, so why don't I just read one more of mine? I'll do this one. This one ends with a poem, with a question, excuse me. So I'll go with that one. So this one's called In the Life. That's it, exactly. What we live excuse me, I'll start over. In the life. That's it, exactly. What we live dwells so deep in the life that we vanish without it. Impossible to untangle me from sunshine or buckthorn berries turning black along the tracks, from dishes sitting dirty by the sink, or from the shiny beetle crawling round and round the table on our deck. Last night, I dreamed of so many places, mountains, waterfalls, jungles, massive cities, even in my sleep, inextricable. Each thread exerts gravity, and I am their center. When the shirt sleeves on the clothesline inflate, is it the wind or the shirt that lives?
Very nice.
All right, so
So I'm a Rilke fan. If you want to close out with Rilke.
okay, I'll clear that, because certainly when I was thinking about about inquiry, this came to mind, and I sort of can't imagine that somebody else in the series hasn't also shared this, but so be it. So this is just an excerpt from his letter to a young poet. So those of you that may not be familiar, Rilke was early 20th century and had a sort of a protege, a young soldier who wrote to him looking for advice, and Rilke kind of took him under his arm and wrote to him. And this is an excerpt from one of his letters, 1903. It says, I want to beg you, as much as I can, dear sir, to be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and to try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms, and like books that are written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers, which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer.
I always love that. I always love that, Rilke.
Mm,
Yes.
mm.
Yeah. Can we live into the question? That's the big question.
Right.
No, it's
And-
great. That's a great excerpt.
And then meanwhile, I have to just love them, right?
Yeah. Very good. Well, Lisken, I'm going to, anybody else have one quick comment before we sign off for the day? I'll just put it on gallery view so I can see everybody.
It's been a pleasure and a privilege to watch from London, England.
Well, thank you for being here, Susan. Thank you to all of you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a treat for me. I missed Lisken last year. I don't know if I was sick or away. So the time we scheduled Lisken, I missed it. So it's great, Lisken, to hear you live today. So thank you
Yeah.
again.
Very glad to have been in conversation with you this time. Thank you.
Yeah. Very good. Peter, I know I'm goading Peter on to like give us some insight here into Lisken, but he's Lisken, you paid him off well. You must have given him a pie or some cookies or something because he's very quiet.
Well, I've enjoyed this very much. And I have to say, it's been a long time since I looked at your chapbook, What We're Made Of. But your reading of Air really, really intrigued me. I don't remember having read it before, or certainly not being impacted by it before. I think it's extremely good at looking at, taking that simple word and examining all of its manifestations. Very good.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Anybody else? Oh, I think we have Teresa. Teresa for one final question. Okay, go ahead. There you go.
Oh, I think I'm getting it finally. Well, I just wanted to say thank you too, along with an audience member from England. Lisken, I think what I'm going to take away from today, and I'm going to try and incorporate in my own work, it was almost a mini workshop on how you so engagingly put an adjective with something that you wouldn't describe that way. And like you had the expression inconsolable apartment. And that just got me. I wouldn't think of an apartment to describe it. The inconsolable part is often used for humans. And so your description of the apartment afterwards made that inconsolable. It sort of reminds me of your other line with the fruit, the fruit and complication. So that how you write is instructive to me today, and I appreciate that a great deal.
Good. Well, I'll look forward to reading something of yours at some point.
Thank you. The inconsolable apartment, I'm feeling that way a little bit, trying to get ready for Christmas. My inconsolable house, trying to organize.
Well,
But thank you so much.
Thank you. And on that note, I especially want to thank everybody for being here at this time of year, because I know it's terribly busy. So thank you for taking the time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That's fantastic. And I think we can close out the recording for today. Thank you, everyone. If you wait, someone's put something in chat. Wait a second. Oh, that was from Teresa. Yeah. Email me if you want to be on the list.